Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Christopher Ray Patton. The stuff that I grew up with is getting older with me. I don't know what happened. I didn't sign up for this. I don't remember putting my name on a dotted line anywhere, but I'm not happy about it. I don't like it, and in fact, I'm pretty frustrated about it. So I'm just going to rant today like crazy, and everybody's just going to have to put up with it. I just can't believe people I grew up with, like whether it's movies, TV, or even down to comic book writers and artists, but like musicians especially. Look, none of you people have permission to get older. I don't know what happened, but again, I didn't sign up for this and I don't like it. But it seems like every time I turn around, there'll be a band or somebody that I've been into and I'll reconnect with on some level. And then inevitably I go to look into them after enjoying their stuff again. Oh, they're all dead now. Oh, freaking great. Well, there goes my day. I'm going to find a cliff and it's over for me. See you, bye. Right. But I'm going to try not to do that. I'll attempt to stay, on the land with soil beneath my feet as we do this podcast. Because today we're talking about one of the best debut albums of all time, in my estimation. And that is The Cars, their self-titled first ever studio album. Let me tell you something, man. If you don't know The Cars, you are missing out. I don't care what genre of music you listen to. I don't care who you like and who you don't like. The Cars is a band you need to experience. This is a listening experience. Look, maybe it's a lofty comparison to Pink Floyd. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not on that level in terms of listening experience. But man, put on a Cars album, kick your feet up, close your eyes, and just enjoy it. I'm telling you, it's that good. And some of their stuff you just cannot help but tap your foot to. The groove, the licks, the hook, man. These guys were Collective Soul long before there was a Collective Soul. I'm sticking to that. But we got to talk about this album, man. I can't wait to get to it. So let's do this. The Cars is the debut studio album by American rock band of the same name, of course, released on June 6, 1978 by Elektra Records. The album was produced by longtime collaborator Roy Thomas Baker and spawned several hit singles, all of which we're going to talk about today, as well as other radio and film hits. All the film hits, let me tell you. The Cars peaked at number 18 on the U.S. Billboard 200 album chart and has been certified 6 times platinum by the recording industry. As we said, it's a great album. Can't wait to review it. 9 tracks on this album. And every time we review an album, we often talk about there's probably mega expanded, remastered, triple album, triple disc version. We're just doing the 9 tracks, kids, on the original album called The Cars. But that is your lowdown for this album. So, Chris, of all the bands we talk about, don't think we've ever mentioned The Cars. And when you asked me, what are we going to do today? I mentioned The Cars, crossing my fingers you weren't going to go, hate that band. Because I'm like, boy, if you don't, be very upset. But what drew you to The Cars? Was your parents into it and that's how you heard it? Did a friend like it? How did you kind of stumble upon them?
So it's kind of weird. I mean, I think it's one of those things where I just kept hearing it on classic radio, just some of their hits when I was in high school, and then kind of got really into them then. Specifically this album, and then we ended up covering just what I needed in my high school band, the Monte Carlo Creeps, and just kind of love for this album specifically spun off from there. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm sure I heard it as a kid growing up listening to classic rock and classic rock stations, and time period of the 90s that the Cars get put in rotation quite a bit. But yeah, like nothing really, none of my family is like super into the Cars or anything. It's kind of something I just came across, which makes a lot of sense with some of the other bands I like, and like the Talking Heads, for instance, I really love some of the bands that they influenced. So I think it's just one of those things where it was kind of destiny. It just came to me in high school.
That's fair. I grew up with them, as I said before. I mean, I was born in '73. Don't nobody do the math. And so I grew up with them. So I listened to them as a kid and listened to them in my teenage years. And it's funny because I was born about just right before they started, became the Cars. They were in bands before that, of course. But, I was kind of there for the whole run. And it was like, I knew the early stuff and then I knew Heartbreak City, which at some point we may have to do Heartbreak City because, geez, that album. Like, I had that thing on cassette tape, man, when it was released. You could not turn on a radio station without hearing a tune off of Heartbreak City. That album was everywhere at one time, man.
Yeah, they're kind of a weird band in that sense of like, I think they have two albums that really, really hit. This album being one, and Heartbreak City being the other. But you don't really hear much from the rest of their discography as far as the radio goes.
It's weird. I guess you're right. Like oldie stations are primarily the ones that were maybe even playing them then. Like, I don't know, man. I won't lament the death of rock radio. I'm sure there's plenty of good rock stations out there that are still doing some good work with metal and whatnot. But hip hop's kind of sort of taken over. But you think it's a case of bad timing in terms of how much we hear them today? I don't know. Maybe that's the wrong term. Maybe just because this music isn't as hot as it used to be. Maybe that's it.
Well, I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily the case, just based on the bands that they influenced. I mean, you got stuff like, LCD Sound System, like I said, Weezer, for instance, like bands that they influenced, you still hear a lot today. I think it's more, there's a bit of that, but at the same time, I mean, if I turn on, which our classic radio station is The River. So if I turn on 97.1 The River and play it for 2 hours or so, I'm sure I'll get a car song in there. So I don't know. I mean, they influenced a lot of people, specifically like indie bands, like like bands like The Strokes, and it's kind of a weird thing. You don't hear a lot of like as pop changed, room for these bands became kind of more niche, or niche, I should say. So they're kind of they're like they're like a synth pop band, new wave type band. So there's just not as much of that until you branch into more, like I said, more like what we consider indie rock genre wise these days.
It's worth noting that they were inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2018. And unfortunately, it was 18 years after Benjamin Orr passed away. And it was 1 year before Rick Ocasek passed away. So at least one of the founding members got to see it happen. We should mention the band: Rick Ocasek, Benjamin Orr, Elliot Easton, Greg Hawkes, and David Robinson, the original lineup of the band here. So, Chris, isn't it 25 years after your debut album that you're eligible, or is it 20? What's that rule of thumb again for Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
I would have to look it up, Tom. I don't know right offhand.
I think it's 20. Boy, if it's 20 and they were eligible in 98, that sucks. Because, man, they should have been first ballot, in my opinion. Like, good Lord, what are we doing? Maybe it's 25. I can't remember now.
Yeah, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is such a weird. It's 25.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's so many bands that deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that aren't. It's a really weird how they determine what's in the Hall of Fame and what's not.
I'm sure it's politics as well, like anything else is, man.
Like Ozzy Solo just got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that, when you think about it like that, and when did his first? I guess because it goes off solo album. That came out in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow,
you're talking. He didn't get in until what, 45 years later?
Dude, that is nuts, man.
But a lot of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now, because they started going to these big performances, I think it's more about kind of like what they do with the WrestleMania Hall of Fame, where it's became more of what kind of live show can we put together and who can we put on it for selling it or streaming it or whatever.
That's fair. We should also mention that Rick Ocasek was on guitar, Benjamin Orr on bass, Elliot Easton was on lead guitar, Greg Hawkes on keyboards, David Robinson on drums. Boy, I got to tell you, Greg Hawkes on keyboards doing a lot of heavy lifting for this band, man. I can't imagine the Cars without keyboard in it. It's not the same band.
The Cars without keyboard in it just has to become a punk band.
Dude,
Like,
that's not a bad call. Yeah.
they're kind of like much like the Talking Heads. I wouldn't be surprised if someone told me the Cars started out as a punk band.
That is not a bad call. Yeah, it's the way you were describing it earlier. It's appropriate of what they've been described as before: new wave, pop rock, power pop, proto punk, garage. Look, I've always thought of them as nerd rock, and that's not an insult to me. You mentioned Weezer. I think that's on the money, dude, for sure.
Yeah, like actually, you mentioned it first, but it totally fits. Like the kind of the style, the sound. It's very reminiscent. But the Cars, they influence people like Blondie. Talking, like I said, the Talking Heads. They're kind of that movement, and that's all considered like um, the punk term you just threw out there. That's all that stuff kind of came in this time period in that area where you get more like Heart of Glass and stuff, for instance, by Blondie. Like that's very much this synth rock or synth pop.
Yeah, that's fair. It's like I'm not a huge Chicago guy. I appreciate the heck out of the band. Great musicians in that band. But I remember like one of the founding members, I forget who it is, at one time was saying that they had a new record producer come in and was trying to get rid of the horn section. And they flat out, it's like, you're telling Jimi Hendrix to put down the guitar, man. You can't do, that's who we are. Like, crazy, man.
Chicago is one of those weird bands where like when I used to collect vinyls by going to like thrift stores, which you don't really do as much anymore because collecting has gotten a lot of people collect vinyl now. When I first started, it wasn't as big of a thing. But you'd go into thrift stores and like you were almost guaranteed to find a Chicago album. I don't know like how many albums they sold on vinyl, but at least in my neck of the woods, a whole lot.
Sure, yeah.
You just be going through stacks of records. It's like half of them are the same Chicago album. I'm like, who the hell's out here listening to this much Chicago?
Crazy. Yeah, that's and part of that I'm sure has to do with how many records were printed, I guess.
Yeah, I went for a long time period there. If you're named after a country, a state, or like a city, your band probably sucked. Was my theory on bands like Boston, Chicago, Asia, Europe.
Oh, not a Boston guy, are we?
No. It's
wow.
not for me. I have an appreciation for the instrumentation, but it's something I would sit down and listen to an album of. Not gonna be for me.
Oh wow. Yeah, there's a different story behind that too. I think the majority of that first album was the main guy, I don't know his name, up front, recording in like a basement or something. And like, I'm not a Boston guy either, but man, they created a sound, dude. And so many other bands that followed tried to mimic that big, loud sound, those big vocals, and like, man, they just couldn't do it. Like that guy's range was insane, man. I'll say that for him.
Yeah, I mean, More Than a Feeling's a cool song. I can't hate on that much. But yeah, outside of that, dude, I could go without Boston.
Yeah, arena rock. Isn't that what they called it? Arena rock, stadium rock, I guess.
See, when I think of like arena rock, I think of like Kiss and AC/DC, stadium rock. That's more of what I think of.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, we just recently did a Kiss episode. So if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to that, go listen to that.
You're missing out. It's a good one. Kiss Alive. Well, look, let's get into this. Because one of the reasons I like doing album reviews with you is because you are a true musician, and because you can give me like honest, blunt opinions. Doesn't mean they're negative. It just means that you can kind of listen to something and know what's happening, and whereas other people can't. So I can't wait to get your take on the band, instrumentation, how everything sounds. So let's kick it off with Good Times Roll. 3 minutes 45 seconds. You know what I'll say? I read this somewhere and I'm like, we could have just said this on the show and then just wrapped it up and it'd have been a 5-minute podcast. But I read a review somewhere where the guy's like, their debut album could have been a greatest hits album and that's it. Dude, he's right.
You could say the same thing. It's funny that we're doing this album about the Cars because it's almost similar to the Van Halen self-titled.
Yeah.
In the same sense, where you could look at that and say that might be their best album in general.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you said that, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I could see that. But yeah, it's one of those things where that's not a bad review. Was that released at the time that the album was released? They're like, this album, their freshman album is the greatest hits album.
That's a good question. I can't remember where it came from. You usually critics aren't that kind unless you are certain bands or singers. They maybe not they're that kind. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, Good Times Roll, 3 minutes 45 seconds. Man, this is a classic, man. I don't know that it's my favorite on the album. I think I know what my favorite is, but that's even hard too because there's so many great ones on here. But what do you think about this tune? And in particular, as you listen to this, what are you hearing? Are you hearing, well, this is straightforward rock, this is 3-chord, or are you hearing something a lot more intricate in the way this thing is actually made here?
So if you're looking at it from that time period, you're getting kind of something that you were really only getting from like stuff like David Bowie. Where you're getting like lots of synth. The electric guitar on the track is very clean, like jingly, something you would get like kind of out of Fender Twin sound, very similar to like, have you ever heard someone describe as a like a chime, like a bell chime? Or it's very very clean guitar tone, and the bass is just always in a very smooth groove throughout most of their songs, but specifically this one, they just sit like a steady backbeat, straight groove. But the biggest thing is their integration of the synthesizer and the guitar together, which is throughout this entire album. But they're able to do that with a solid, just that solid, steady backbeat that they have through most of their tracks. This is a great example of that. It's also a great example of Rick's kind of, I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but he just kind of, he's like detached in his lyrics, almost robotic, in the way that he delivers the song. And I think that's done purposefully, like just an emotional detachment from the entire thing, which kind of gives the song its feel. And that's kind of a common theme throughout this album.
That's, I don't know if I could have said it that way, but man, that's a great way to describe it. What's the benefit of that other than that's just his style? What do you think that does for the song? Does it just make it hip? I mean, what's it doing for it?
I mean, if you're looking at like a traditional pop song, it's almost a sarcastic take on a lot of
that. Yeah.
When you get like, when we get into some of the lyrics of the other songs, it'll be a little easier to point out. But like in this, it like the way he's like, let the good times roll.
Yeah.
It's like, when you hear someone say, let the good times roll, it's usually like a positive, like something awesome's about to happen. And the way he's singing it is if you're talking about the 2024 election.
Oh yeah. There you go. That's fair.
But yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but it comes up, it'll come up again as we talk through the album. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the feel, it's very atmospheric. And it kind of sets the tone of what this album is, and it reprises as well later on in the album.
Yeah. We should note also, Ric Ocasek wrote all the songs except for track number 8, which was written by Ocasek and Greg Hawkes. So he's doing all the work behind the scenes anyway. He's the genius behind the lyrics. I love the idea of it being different, and I shared with you a clip of them on Midnight Special, and kids, that probably predates most of you. But do yourself a favor and go look up the Midnight Special with the Cars. Basically, any of the time period with their first few albums. I mean, dude, they're not moving around. They're just in one place, and they look like, I'm going to use the word nerd. I've self-described as a nerd my whole life. I've been a comic nerd, a pro wrestling nerd, and a pop culture nerd. So to me, it's not a bad word. But they got the glasses. They kind of look like they did very well in science class, in high school. But they're so cool. Like the dark glasses, and man, they get in the pocket of that groove, of that hook of this song. And man, it's just, I don't know how people can listen to that and not tap their foot or fall in love with it, man. I think that's where they really flourished, was the ability to write a hook. I made that Collective Soul comparison in the intro of this show, man. like, I don't know if I really connected the dots, but I hear a lot of that in their stuff where, they'll write a hook and they'll repeat it from start to finish. And there'll be go to the bridge, go to the chorus, and then come back to that hook. And it just keeps going.
Boink Studios is the home of Tom Clark's Main Event, Tom Clark's 6M podcast, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Visit the site today for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Check out the site and bookmark today, boinkstudios.com.
To me, I'm like, I don't know if Collective Soul happens without the Cars kind of doing that first.
Yeah, the Cars are interesting in the sense that, you could say that about like the Beatles and anyone, right? As far as carrying a hook throughout a song. But yeah, they're interesting in that sense. As far as the look goes, you also saw that with like the Talking Heads. It's almost like they're taking the Buddy Holly 50s rockabilly type thing, and then twisting it, modernizing it, heading into the 80s, which you'll see a lot more of when you get into new wave, with big hair and such.
Well, that maybe segues into track number 2, My Best Friend's Girl, at 3 minutes 43 seconds, which has a country western lick out of nowhere, right? And if you're not expecting, you're like, was that a country western lick I just heard? Like, I love this song because it does that, and because I kind of feel like at any given time they're throwing you a curveball where maybe you weren't expecting it. By the way, do you have a favorite song on this album or no?
I do, but it is for this one, it's just what I needed. I love it. I still love it to this day. It's fun. It's still something that I pick up on my guitar and play. It's just it is by far my favorite song on this album, but I love a lot of stuff on this album.
Yeah, fair.
So it's kind of it's one, I think that's like a nostalgia love kind of thing where it's stuck with me.
That makes sense, honestly. So My Best Friend's Girl, man, again, lyrics are simple. You got your nuclear boots and your drip dry glove. I mean, some of the lyrics you're like, I don't know what he's talking about, but man, it's great. It fits whether it was intentional or not. This one, of course, written by Ocasek. The song was released as the album's second single, peaked at number 35 in the US Billboard Hot 100, reached number 3 in the UK. What do you think about this one, man?
I mean, lyrically, it's a really great song. Once again, you get some kind of like the emotional detachment from the situation, and the way that he delivers a lot of the lines. But I mean, you got quotes like, "I used to hold her, but she's not mine." So it's one of those things where you dated a girl first, and now your best friend or friend is dating her. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. It's kind of like that thing where you're sitting at a party looking across the room at a girl you used to date. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're seeing her have a good time with someone else. And I think the song nails that. And then you get the juxtaposition with kind of my best friend's girlfriend. With the backup vocals and stuff. It's great. This is a really, really good song. And once again, a lot of it is the way he delivers the lines, and and once again, the country lick, like you're talking about, very much kind of like a Mark Knopfler type lick.
Oh, well done.
Which I dig. It's a cool little jingly guitar lick. You'll hear that kind of throughout these tracks, and it's weird the way that they blended that synth so perfectly throughout a lot of these songs with the guitar.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's again, I love that it throws that curveball. Man, if you slowed this song down, it's kind of like a doo-wop 50s song where a guy's heartbroken because he doesn't have his girl anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I like that.
And I don't know if you isolate the bass line, it's really melodic in this song as well, which is kind of
interesting. Yeah. By the way, I'm not going to do this on every track, but like, do you hear anything in this song other than it's just well written? Like the sound, the sounds are, I don't know how to say it. The sounds complement each other. Like the groove's in the right place. I mean, what is it about this song? It sounds simple, but is it simple? I guess is what I'm asking.
So if you're just talking about like it from that standpoint, the the bass itself is higher in the mix,
Hmm.
which I think kind of provides it that catchy feel on this particular song. So like if
Mhm.
you were to take like an EQ and drop the bass out completely, it would be almost a different experience listening to the song. Or drop the bass a lot lower.
Right. Benjamin
I'm not
Ward
sure if that
killing it.
answered. I don't know if that answered what you were.
No, it
answered
is.
your question.
It does.
You really get a big synth-driven atmosphere to the song as well.
Sure. And I mean, that's a lot of their sound. But, it's always interested me about how, I mean, you see those performances in the late 70s, dude, they had just come out. And I'm like, I don't know, like, like, how are you that good already? Like their first album was 78, but they couldn't have been together that long before they actually recorded their first album. Technically, they got together in 76, but man, they're sharp in those performances, dude. Like they're just crushing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, they worked with one of the all-time greatest record producers, like on this album. So like, as far as how the mix sounds and everything, listening to this album, that a lot of that should be credited to Roy Thomas Baker. And I don't know if you know a lot about his work, but he did Queen and Queen 2.
Ah, well done.
For instance, specifically was the one who did the mix on Bohemian Rhapsody. So,
wow.
I mean, he worked with kind of everyone: the Stones, David Bowie, the Who. So, as far as like,
yeah, we actually did.
Album,
that goes
a long way.
Yeah, we did Queen's first album here on the 6M, so it's there. So I'm sure we talked about him, but it's been a minute since we did that. Yeah, I didn't realize the guy had such an incredible resume, but yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I like My Best Friend's Girl, but it's still not my favorite one on the album. It's a great song though. So go to track number 3 again. 3 minutes 43 on the nose, as track number 2 is. This is just what I needed. Why do you love this one? Is it nostalgia that you connect to the most with this one?
So when I first started learning to play guitar, kind of 13, 14, it's one of the first songs I kind of learned. It is very much an easy power chord progression. And then you get this great synth hook coming through. Very heavy bass. It's just a fun song to play, which I think is a part of the reason I like it so much. But yeah, I mean, heavy nostalgia. It's also just, I mean, it's just a great song. It's got a fun hook with the synth. Like I said, in the chorus is just fun to sing along to. Also, I love is like the way his lyrics go from verse to verse, the way he kind of drops his voice headed between the verses and into the chorus. Yeah. I think the success in the song is definitely the way the synthesizer and the guitar interact with one another, for sure.
This was their first big hit from the album. And it's, let's see, so the singles off this one, well, we've mentioned the 3 singles already off this album. Just what I needed. My Best Friend's Girl and Good Times Roll were the 3 singles off this album. Can you believe that one of these other tunes that I'm thinking of was not a 4th single? Or 5th? God, there's 2 more on here, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing is this song and the next song both have a little bit of distortion on the guitar.
Yeah.
Whereas your first 2 tracks, you're getting really like a clean sound.
That's a good call. The opening lick of this song, by the way, is as recognizable as anything I've ever heard in my time listening to music anyway. I instantly know, of course, what this is.
It's just hitting the chords like, da-da.
Yeah, that's it.
Da-da. Yeah, it's great. Like I said, I enjoy still to this day playing this song. And it's one of those things that I kind of go back to when I'm just fiddling around. Even if it's just hitting that little section at the intro. Yeah, it's great. I'm trying to think if there was anything I wanted to say more about his lyrics. I'm going through my notes. I came prepared this time. Once again, you get kind of, you don't get any kind of warmth or happiness as he delivers a lot of these lines.
Yeah.
I needed someone to feed. I needed someone to bleed. I needed
Yes.
someone to be. You're just what I needed. You're just there because I needed a relationship, not a relationship of a healthy relationship.
Well, if you're going to look at it that way, it could get a little dark, probably.
I mean, he does that. I needed someone to bleed.
Yeah.
It's not a happy song, and that's what I'm saying. Like there is a juxtaposition between the delivery of the lines, the lyrics themselves, to this synth pop sound. And I think that's what makes it work so well. And you kind of hear that with, like I said, with bands like Weezer and the Talking Heads as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Weezer, very much so, man. Yeah, I love this song. I do. It's it's one of those things where it's, you mentioned earlier about Let the Good Times Roll, and he sings it very, kind of down in his register, and he's not going very high, doesn't sound excited or happy. And the song's called Let the Good Times Roll. And then just when I needed, when he's a little bit more upbeat, tempo's a little faster, and it sounds like, oh, it's just what I need. You're the best girl ever. And then you're like, no, that's not what he means. You know what I mean? It's weird.
Yeah, he does a lot with his vocals. Like I said, even heading into the chorus, he does that thing where he kind of drops his register before going into the chorus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's yeah, man, I just love the song. It's a lot of fun. I understand why this is probably the biggest song, honestly, by the Cars.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just one that you can put on in the car and always have a good time to.
So also, Ocasek is lead vocal on Good Times Roll and My Best Friend's Girl. He is not lead vocal on Just What I Needed. That's Orr, Benjamin Orr. So,
okay,
dude, there are some tunes when you're like, wait a minute, I don't know if I know who's singing that. Do you know what I mean? Because they had very close in their sound. So something to be said for that. Also, I would think, I was going to put you on the spot and ask you what you think their most well-known song is. I don't know if it'd even be on this album. I think maybe it'd either be Let's Go or it'd be something off Heartbreak City. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think Just What I Needed is their most well-known song. Just because I think it has the most play, right?
That's fair.
As far as like classic radio stations go.
Yeah.
But you grew up during this time period, so you could probably speak like more to the popularity of when their later albums came out. Because, like listening to the classic radio stations now, that's more curated. So I could be wrong. I'm looking from a different generation's time spent, where I've definitely heard Just What I Needed way more than anything off Heartbreak. And My Best Friend's Girl would probably be the second, as far as tuning into the radio and hearing the track.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you're right. I think a lot of it depends on your age and the version of the Cars you grew up with. Because really, I mean, after Heartbreak City, you're not getting a lot. They had 9 studio albums total. And let's see, Heartbeat City was 84, Door to Door was 87, and Move Like This was 2011 after Benjamin Orr had passed away. So yeah, wow. And then there's Shake It Up in 81, dude.
Yeah. Shake It Up was a big MTV hit, right? Like video wise.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Great song. Holy Lord, I love this band. So let's go to a track on this album that was not a single. It is really the first track on this album that does not sound like it's, I'm not going to say not the same band, but it kind of sounds like, yeah, we don't care if this gets on the radio or not. It's not exactly a radio-friendly hit. This is I'm in Touch with Your World at 3 minutes, 30 seconds. This is an odd one for me. What do you think about this one?
It's okay. It does. It really, to me, it doesn't like fit the rest of the album, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It is different. I will say that. I don't know that I dislike it, but it's not one of my favorites on the album.
It's reminding me of something, and I can't for the life of me think of what it is, but the music reminds me of something else. It'll hit me when I'm not expecting it. It's weird. You get the diplomatic treatment, you get the force-fed future, you get the funk after death, you get the Weisenheimer brainstorm. I have no idea what we're doing here. I really don't have any idea, and there's not a lot I can find to tell me what's really happening in this song, man. But it's different. It's not exactly the one you bop your head to, Chris.
No, not at all. I don't even have any really good notes on this one, so it must not have hit with me.
And when it starts to crank up, you think they're going to go somewhere, and then they come right back to where they were.
This song and "You're All That I've Got Tonight" are more straightforward. So like the synthesizer is more like just almost adding texture. So it kind of has a different vibe than a lot of the rest of the album, which is a very specific sound, like for lack of a power pop, for lack of a better genre term.
Yeah, that's fair.
But these two kind of don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of back and forth on this one. Not to flip past anything too quickly, but I just don't have a lot for that one. Track number 5, though, which again was not a single, but at 3 minutes, 3 seconds, I think is better than track 4. This is Don't Just Stop. Much better song, in my opinion. And this one's got some very 80s synth vibes to it. Like, very, very much so. And again, nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I like this song a lot, man. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't do anything with this in terms of a single, really.
I mean, how many singles do you release off the album, though? Like 3, right?
3 singles, yeah.
So I think there's better songs on this album. I mean, this entire song is about impatience.
Yeah.
It's a fun. It's a fast paced song. It's definitely a straightforward like pop rock. It does have the bass on this. I'm sure you loved because it's a very like funk bass line.
Oh, big time, yeah.
Which is kind of unique from the rest of the tracks.
Yeah, I do like this one. I guess in the grand scheme of things, if you're asking me if it measures up to the 3 singles release, I'd say probably not.
I like
it is.
It kind of the placement of it on the album. It's very high energy, and then we get the reprise to Let the Good Times Roll and kind of the sarcasm again.
Yeah.
Then going into You're All That I've Got Tonight, which is completely different than like Don't You Stop. So it is, as far as placement on the album, if you're just listening to the album all the way through, I think it's well placed and it's a good song to fit at number 5.
Yeah, this one's, it's a little, we'll say risque. Maybe. Not the most risque thing I've ever heard come from a rock band, that's for sure.
I mean, after going through some of the Kiss lyrics off Alive.
Yeah.
Not that bad.
I mean, yeah. What's the one? I can't remember the tune now, but you know what I mean.
It's on the episode, kids.
Yes. Go back and look. I'm not going to tell you. You got to do some homework. Well, let's move on to track number 6. You're All I've Got Tonight at 4 minutes, 13 seconds. It is one of the longest tracks on the album. Again, man, an instantly recognizable tune for me. Like another song I grew up listening to. And very simple in the lyrics. These lyrics are not, there's not a Pulitzer being one with these lyrics here. But it's working. The sound works. The synth works. I mean, dude, I freaking love this tune, man. I love this song a lot, dude.
Yeah, it's a great song. I like that it like kind of comes after that reprise. And let's see what else. Let me go through my notes here. Yeah, so you kind of get this is like a emotional dependency on someone else with the way that the lyrics go. Like it's kind of coming from a dark place with like You're All That I've Got Tonight. It's not a happy thing. It's almost like don't leave me. You're all I have in this world. And the delivery on this is once again is very robotic. The guitar is more laid back, but straight ahead rock and roll. And then once again, that synth is more just adding layers like texture. It's not really, you're not getting any big catchy licks out of the synth on this song. And I think it fits it well with the lyrics.
Yeah, again, like it's still not a happy song, man. It's kind of, when I didn't realize before we started diving into this, I'm going to use the word dark. Some of the stuff is a little dark. Like, you know, don't know if I expected that, man.
Yeah, this song is like if Bruce Wayne wrote a track. It is brooding into, once again, a lot of the songs like this are like, I just see the guy at the party that is just kind of miserable to be there, looking at other people enjoying themselves in the way some of it comes across. But this song kind of, to me, has a feeling of like internal struggle.
Well, he's flat out saying the tune, I don't care if you mistreat me. In other words, like, doesn't care if you use me or abuse me. Doesn't care, you know, like, I'll be here, whatever you want to do. I'm not going anywhere. You're all I got. So you might as well just take crap on me.
It's awful when you actually like think about it, but it's the Cars. So they're able, like, I think that's sometimes what makes a great pop song is being able to have this. With some of their other songs, it's more apparent, but like having like kind of this pop music, but with like a darker lyric. So there's more to it than just your straightforward, like, I want to hold your hand, for instance.
Yeah. Well, Help by the Beatles. John was in a depression. And if you read the lyrics, he's in depression. But because they tapped their feet and shook their heads, no one knew. And it was sold as a pop song. But John's like, yeah, I was not in a good place when I wrote that. I'm like, but you don't know. Because again, they make it sound like something else.
Yeah. And for the average radio listener, someone that's not going to go through and break these down, you know, track by track, that's just a fun song. Right. But like when you dig into it, I think that's the difference between a good pop song and a great pop song.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I like that. By the way, I want to get into the lyrics of the next song, because this has got to be more upbeat. 4 minutes, 12 seconds, Bye Bye Love. Look, this has got to be more upbeat. Again, another recognizable song for me. Kind of surprised this one wasn't a single, if I'm being honest. Man, I love this. I love the keyboard in it. I just love it. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. In my opinion, this kind of sounds more like this was, and I'm not saying it was, kind of sounds like, well, this is made to be radio friendly. Do you know what I mean? It just has the elements of what I think a pop song at that time would have. I mean, it's long, it's too long, but still, if this were 2 minutes, I'd say that's the quintessential pop song. What do you think about Bye Bye Love?
Bye Bye Love is great in its placement on the album, once again, because it's coming after You're All That I've Got Tonight.
Yeah.
And the song is about breaking free from a relationship.
Ah, well done. Yeah.
So it's kind of like saying, you know, bidding adieu to love, bidding farewell, kind of embracing your own independence. So as far as like the placement of it and then heading into Moving in Stereo, I think it's great. It's not my favorite song on the album. It does have a fast tempo. This one kind of starts hitting what you see later in the 80s with new wave. So
yeah, this is a good tune, man. I love this song a lot. Again, I don't have many notes on this.
And I mean, once again, you get this very upbeat song, and then it's contrasting with a lot of the emotion in the lyrics, like the emotional weight of the lyrics.
This is Orr on the lyrics. Yep, he's on the lead vocals for the rest of the album here. But and the fact that he's kind of speaking the lyrics is different too. Like, he's still singing, but there's moments when he's speaking lyrics. But I love this tune, man. I freaking love this tune. At least this one doesn't, it's not sad.
Yeah, I guess it's true. Yes, it's true.
Just think of the Cars as a
It's-
fun band till you listen to the
it's-
lyrics.
It's definitely happy if you do it two piece. If you do it back to back, if you're listening to it in order, it's a much better situation than
That's true.
The song before.
So, and again, I know I'm zipping through this one, kids, but track number 8's my favorite one on the album. It's the longest song on the album, 4 minutes 43 seconds. Moving in Stereo is my absolute favorite on this entire album. It's probably my top 3 favorite Cars songs of all time. I just freaking love it. It doesn't go anywhere, but I don't think it needs to. I love it. It's in the pocket. It stays in the pocket. It knows what it is. They know what it is. I freaking love it. And it's, if you're a Fast Times at Ridgemont High fan, you know where this song is in the movie. And I'm just, hey man, I grew up watching that too, man. So,
it's such
I
an
was a fan.
iconic. It's such an iconic moment in film in general. It's definitely one that always makes like the Rolling Stones lists, and even me growing up as well, Tom. So
there you go.
don't feel bad. I think that scene still holds up.
That's Phoebe Cates from Gremlins fame too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, boy. By the way, it's in the archives, kids.
Love
Not
me
Phoebe
some
Cates, but Gremlins.
Got to do Gremlins too soon, by the way.
I'm saying.
Still haven't done it. But yeah, Moving in Stereo, I think is it's one of the most unique tracks on the album. It's really produced, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's got lots of layers. I would be interested to see how many tracks are actually on this song itself. As far as like how many synth tracks, how many guitar tracks, it's definitely got this like kind of dreamy rhythm to it, for lack of a better term. It's always hard describing music. You come up with like terms like, it's got haunting mids or dreamy rhythm.
Well, a lot of it too is subjective, man. Like the way you hear it may not be the way someone else hears it. So you know what I mean? So like, yeah. Using stereo as an allegory for putting thoughts you might not want to have into other place, and excellent audio mixing, and use the stereo effect the song conveys the too prevalent habit of putting your problems aside rather than dealing with them. Interesting.
Yeah, it's very much like a song about confusion within a relationship. So it's still playing off of the themes that we've been kind of skirting around and going throughout the rest of the songs. But this is post him leaving the relationship. So like in the order of the tracks, you get this very abusive relationship, and you're all that I've got tonight, to Bye Bye Love, and then to dealing with being alone after the fact.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what the song is conveying.
Yeah, that's the entire album's a relationship when you think about it that way. It really is, man.
Yeah, I mean, it could almost be done. I mean, you could almost do like a 90-minute film from track Let the Good Times Roll. If you do the Let the Good Times Roll reprise from track 6 to 10, you could do a movie.
Yeah, there's plenty of music critics over the years that said this was one of their best experimental tracks. See, that sounds like a new wave update of Eno era Roxy music. Never got into Roxy music. Have you ever gotten into that? Or into them?
No, it's kind of like a dabble thing more than a get into.
I don't really know a lot about Brian Ferry, to be honest with you. Not a lot. It comes with having been born and raised on this continent versus the UK, I'm sure, where they were huge. But yeah, I mean, this song's got its flowers, it looks like. Again, interesting that it wasn't. It's funny when you go through an album review and you're like, this debut album, how come this song wasn't? How come this song wasn't a single? This song should have been a single too. They're just so good. Maybe it's just repetition through the years and the songs grow on you. They get played on the radio and it's like, oh, it's a great song. You know what I mean? Maybe that's it. Moving in Stereo is it's almost 4.5 minutes, dude. That's a lot of airplay for one tune.
I mean, in a world of classic rock, is it though?
That's fair. It's like the Beatles, George Martin was questioning the length of Hey Jude. It's like it's too long for radio. And it's like, Paul's like, don't worry about it. They'll play it. It's us. They'll play it. It's fine. And he was right. So
I mean, Freebird and Stairway to Heaven are 7 minutes long, and you hear them quite often.
What's the Steve Miller Big Jet Airliner? Is that it?
Yeah.
Where the song starts with that guitar and it lasts for like 10 minutes and then the song starts.
Yeah.
I think maybe I got it backwards with the other one. Keep Rocking Me. I can't remember, but one of them starts with an incredibly long solo and then the song actually begins. But you can tell on the radio where that's been edited. Of course, they took all that out.
Right.
Because you're getting ready to sing along with their song. You're like, you butchered it. You know? Yeah, it's my favorite one on the album, man. Moving Stereo. I freaking love this song. I just love it. I can't get enough of it, man.
That goes back to like when you were, most listened to song or most well-known song. It might be one of the most well-known songs simply because it's in such a classic movie, in such a classic moment in that movie.
It's one movie. Just leave it alone. Has there been an attempt to remake Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Because if so, I'm forgetting it.
I hope not. They did do an in-character script reading of the movie, though, with all of the original cast, which is really cool.
Oh, I don't know if I knew that.
Did that during COVID. It was like a charity thing. You can find it. It's out there on YouTube. It's really cool to see Spicoli all these years later.
Very cool. Yeah, man. And I assume that, he's got to be a past Ray Walston. Am I getting his name right? The teacher?
I think so, yeah.
I think, man, how'd I get that name? He was on My Favorite Martian. That's going back to like the 50s. And no, I'm not that old, so everybody shut up. But yeah, he was, God, man, he'd been around for a long time. Now I want to go see that movie, man. I haven't watched it in forever.
So one thing that's, when reading about Roy Thomas Baker, apparently his production on the album was pivotal in shaping the way albums were made in the 1980s. Specifically his way of blending electronic and acoustic instrumentation while still having a very radio-friendly sound became like a blueprint for productions. So very detailed-oriented influence producers like Mutt Lange, who did AC/DC and Def Leppard. You kind of get that big sound that you're talking about, like the stadium rock sound. So when you talked about stadium rock earlier, that's that attention to detail. So apparently he was this album kind of went into that sound as far as the production goes in the mix.
Yeah, that's I guess he was one of the producer of the day. Like, just, Mutt Lange, great example. Bob Rock, great example. Those guys that they get a reputation, and then the more popular they get, artists want to work with them. Next thing you know, they're in demand, heavily in demand. So I guess that makes sense. So I was just going to ask, like, about the producer part of this, and this could take an hour, so it doesn't have to. But I'm curious, in your opinion, like, where is... All right, so knowing what you know about this guy, in your opinion, what is it about him? Is it just a matter of giving the band direction, knowing when to do certain things on the album and where to do them, how to list the tracks, guidance in terms of tone? I mean, how deep in the weeds do you think a guy like this actually got? Or what do you know enough about him to really answer that?
Well, I mean, it sounds like he was very, very detail oriented. And if you go and listen to those the first two Queen albums, and you listen to some of like Brian May talking about how recording some of that stuff was not necessarily the most fun thing in the world. I think you could say he's definitely very detail oriented and probably helped shape at least a lot of the atmospheric stuff, right? On these tracks. Now, to get to work with a producer like that, your band already has to be really good. You know what I mean? Like, they have to hear you and know, okay, I want to work. Because, I mean, this is someone coming off already having won Grammys. So you would think the same thing with Rick Rubin. Like, Rick Rubin's not just going to work with anybody, right?
Sure.
Like, so there's something to be said about that. Like, you already have to be pretty polished and have a good sound to go into a studio and be able to track like that. I think I would absolutely hate tracking tracking like that, where you're doing, 6 different guitar tracks, and then they're going to take the best of each one and then mix it together and put together a song, and then you have to go back and then relearn how to play that song live. But I will say, from the live videos that I've watched of this album and some of the stuff that you've sent me, it still comes across like the album. So that's the key. You got to be able to, like, as Rush said, they're not going to play anything that they can't play in person.
Right. Yeah.
That's their big thing, is that they would record most of their takes live because they wanted the album to sound like how they sound live.
Sure.
So there's got to be a good mixture and in between in that. And I think they kind of nailed it, because like when you listen to the Cars, like if you listen to a live performance of the Cars, you still get the same vibe.
Yeah, that's fair. That's and again, like, it's their sound. It's a dumb thing to say about a band. Of course, how else would you identify a band? But I don't know, the Cars just have that sound, man. Like, you can say this band that they inspired is similar. This band that came along a year later is similar. But I don't know, man. Unless there's a band floating around I'm not aware of or just haven't thought about it, I don't think anybody sounds like the Cars. Like, they just had such a distinctive sound, and I just love them. Like, we've done this whole album. We got one track left, by the way, kids. Track number 9 is all mixed up at 4 minutes, 14 seconds. Again, not a single. And Chris, probably not the best song on the album, but there's nothing wrong with this song either. Like, I recognize this song. So don't know how well known it is, but what do you think about this one to sort of cap off the album here?
All Mixed Up is almost like dealing on the other side of the relationship after you break up with someone. So this is the last track on the album, but it's talking about the person that he ended the relationship with. They're having a hard time and he doesn't know what to do about it, right? Like, that's pretty much the lyrics. It's just a very flat tone, delivery wise. Once again, like a lack of any kind of emotional attachment to the situation. And it creates kind of that contrast like we've been talking about, which I think is a lot of what makes this album great. It's kind of like he's engaging in the situation, but kind of more observing it than wanting to be a part of it.
Good call. Yeah.
But this is I don't know, maybe that's why I liked it so much in high school. I went through a couple of bad breakups and like year-long relationships. Maybe that's why this album stuck with me and the Cars stuck with me so much during that time period. But
you definitely can't say that this is told from the perspective of a sentimental guy. None of this album. Like, it's, Benjamin Orr is probably, between the two, between him and Ocasek, Orr is the one that did the ballads in the 80s, right? So, he could go there a little bit more than Rick could in terms of his sound and his own vocal range. But, you're not getting any of that here. This is, like we said, disconnected, unaffected. I don't feel any of this. Kind of a love story or lack thereof, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's why this album is so influential to a lot of bands, because there are certain singers that just kind of have that quality about them in general. So when you get into stuff like, the Talking Heads, who are already around during this time period, but this album, like them heading into the 80s, you get a lot of that with Byrne, and that's just how he sings.
Yeah.
So taking something that somebody would consider a weakness and then writing around that is almost a skill in itself. That can be very hard to do.
No, that's true. Yeah. Well, kids, at 35 minutes even and only 9 songs, this album made history. And if you are a younger person and can't appreciate the history it made, you don't need to take our word for it. Listen to it. And if that doesn't get you, go back and read reviews. Go back and read about album sales. Read, as Chris said earlier, about how many bands were affected after the fact. How many musicians are probably working today, and how many of those their kids are probably musicians today because at some point or another, somebody in the family picked up a Cars album and said, I want to do that. I mean, that's, to me, that is how, Chris, I think that's how any of this day's going. I think it's how comic books remain relevant. I think it's how any creative art form where someone after the fact goes, God, it's the best thing I've ever seen. I want to draw that. I wonder if I could draw that. Next thing you know, years later he's working for Marvel or DC. To me, it's the same thing. Like I'm just inspired to do something else. Not necessarily I need to get out of this town and this place sucks and I need some money. I'm sure that's part of it for a lot of people. But the other part of it, Chris, is like, I just want to create something. Like this inspires me to do my own version of it. And if they can do it, I know I can do it.
For sure. I mean, you know, we could talk about influences forever, but I think like the perfect example of a band inspired by this that went on to create similar music would be the Killers. I think there's a same sense of urgency, the catchy riffs, kind of a mix between old school rock and roll and like modern synth sounds. The use of irony in their lyrics, kind of being emotionally detached from the situation. The Cars are very similar in that sense. So a lot of like the stuff from my time period, kind of, let's say the 2000s, bands like, you know, Tame Impala, MGMT, The Killers, The Strokes, Interpol, all of those bands, you could definitely put them in the sense of this album and the Cars in general and go, okay, they were definitely influenced by the Cars. It's one thing that we didn't talk about with this album outside of their image, but the album cover itself is iconic.
It's great. What do you know about it? Because I don't have anything.
I don't know a lot about it, other than I've always loved the album cover. It's very minimalistic, and it just looks great. Like I don't know who did the art on it, but it is like, it stands out when you're flipping through albums. You'll see it and know exactly what it is.
Yeah, let's see. Let's see, I've got it somewhere. Here we go. Unlike many of the Cars album covers, the cover for the Cars was designed by the record company. Well, that just ruined my day.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
You believe that crap? Said the drummer apparently was behind some of the other album covers, which I'm sure I didn't know that. The drummer would have been, and we mentioned the band at the beginning. The drummer is David Robinson. And according to him, he said in an interview that he had designed a very different album cover for the Cars that cost $80 to design. And he said, I remember the price exactly. It was completely finished and everything, but it was a little more bizarre than the cover that they had in mind. So they changed some of it because of copyright problems and put it in as the inner sleeve. But I think that was way more how we envisioned who we were then. The cover was not well liked by members of the band. Robinson said, I thought that when the Electric came out, it was way too slick. The pictures of us I didn't like. Guitarist Elliot Easton expressed dislike for that big grinning face, saying, man, I got tired of that cover. Dude, I had no idea, man.
It's funny what a band thinks versus the rest of the world. That happens a lot.
Right.
I think it's a great album cover. So maybe the record label was right on this one.
Man, don't say that too loud.
Well, hey, sometimes.
No, hey, I love it. I freaking love it. I think it's great. I think it's classic. But, I mean, it's not, smell the glove, I'll tell you that.
That's very true. I will say that, we're talking about the modern artists, but, bands that they influenced kind of in the 80s, I think that you don't really get Devo and Tears for Fears and Billy Idol without this album. I think there's definitely, you could look at that and go, okay, a lot of their sound is similar. Duran Duran, for instance. I know that Robert Smith from The Cure has specifically talked about some of the catchiness of the synths and things inspired him in the 80s. So when you start getting your classic Cure hits, you could definitely point back and go, okay, there's a direct connection there. Said by the man himself. So
I've never got into The Cure, man. Have you ever been into them?
I love The Cure.
Really?
I think they're great. Yeah.
Never got into them.
That new album they just put out is really, really good too.
Really? Interesting.
They got a new album coming out in 2025. I'm excited. I am a big Cure fan. Maybe you'll have to tackle it at some point.
Hey, I'm not anti. I'm willing to give it a chance. There's some bands I've never really, just haven't went down that road. And I just have not went down that road with them.
They're a band that has a pretty big discography and it evolves. So you get kind of some of them are the poppy stuff in the 80s, and then you get to Disintegration. which has the title track from The Cure, which is what we've also done, or The Clash, or not The Clash, The Crow. God, let me get it out eventually. Talking to music and flipping to movies, not my strong suit. But that song comes off that album, so you get kind of a darker, almost more industrial sound in the '90s. So they're an interesting band as far as how they evolved over the years.
Yeah. Well, the extent of my knowledge of The Cure is maybe one or two songs, and then the Rochambeau reference from South Park when Smith was on the show.
Where he fights giant robotic Barbara Streisand.
Yes.
As the good Lord intended.
Well, I'll Rochambeau you for it. Well, kids, there you have it. There's the Cars' debut album, 1978 to now. I'll tell you that Rick Ocasek and Benjamin Orr, which I don't think I mentioned, every band that Ocasek had been in, he had always been in with Benjamin. So you can imagine, like, in terms of, we didn't really dive into the band's history. They did have, falling out's probably too harsh of a term. I don't know that it was really all that intense from what I researched. Not that intense. Benjamin he fell in love with a girl at some point and wanted to have her be involved. And they kind of were pushing back on that. And then the band eventually broke up. But is it, well, that they never spoke again. I don't know if it was to that extent, but I have not personally uncovered anything where Ocasek is throwing him under the bus for any reason. But who knows? If we weren't there, how do we know? But I don't know if there was like bad blood. There was an attempting to come back at one point that did not evolve, or Ocasek, where the other band members brought in Todd Rundgren to sing lead vocal on this tour, and they did an album called The New Cars, which went nowhere, as you can imagine. By the way, Todd Rundgren is a freaking legend, so don't sleep on that guy, because great career as not just a singer-songwriter, but a producer also. But it just didn't click, Chris. People wanted the Cars, and that's not what they got. So, there's just not a lot of, again, if I'm missing it, I'm missing it. Maybe someone calls me out on it. But in terms of buckets of bad blood sitting around somewhere, I don't know. Just kind of feels like maybe they kind of outgrew each other at one point, as a lot of bandmates tend to do. But, dude, they left behind 9 studio albums that are just, God, man, there's a little something there for everybody, I think.
I mean, you kind of get a weird, like, they disbanded in '88, but then also music shifts and changes.
Yeah.
So a world for the Cars, you don't really get anything like the Cars outside of Weezer, to me at least, like something that is, you could directly relate back to them until the 2000s, which is kind of crazy, because you would think them doing a comeback album with where indie rock went, with bands like I said, like the Strokes and the Killers, that would open up an age for a great Cars album. So what they put out, I guess, just didn't click. I've never listened to that Todd Rundgren album, so I can't really speak on it. I like Todd Rundgren.
Mm-hmm.
Funny enough, my wife's has been watching Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he did he composed music for 4 of the episodes.
Oh, wow.
Specifically one of the Luau episodes, which kind of shocked me, because it got to the credits and it was like Todd Rundgren. I was like, that's okay. That's kind of weird. The music was good in the episode, but it's not like, I wouldn't have known that it was Todd Rundgren until it hit. He apparently did an interview where he had done some TV there to make some money during that time period, which is kind of strange. So yeah, it's that is weird. A weird combination of people, Easton Hawks and Todd Rundgren, to form an offshoot of this band.
And, it's a good point about them. They I don't know if the timing wasn't right, if they weren't interested in it, I don't know. But Neil Young got a second career thanks to Pearl Jam, thanks to grunge rock, man, because they absolutely said, that's our guy. Like, if not for him, we don't have a genre. Like, he kind of got, not that he ever should have been dismissed, because Neil Young's freaking awesome, but kind of cool that it came back around. Funny how that works, man. Like, not music, of course, but Evel Knievel came back in style because of the X Games. Like the skateboarders and the bikers and the BMX guys, like, dude, they worship freaking Evel Knievel. It's funny, like to your point, how that stuff circles around sometimes.
Yeah, that's kind of, like I said, the gap of the 90s, you don't really get as much of that, but it's definitely by the time you get to when the Killers released Hot Fuss, it's very, I mean, on that album, you could definitely see like, oh, we were definitely inspired. So it would have been cool for them to do something modern but like I said, I never listened to the new Cars, so I don't know. I don't know what that album's like. Maybe it is like that. Who knows? But I mean, this album's an absolute banger for a first album. This is another one that kind of falls in the category of Van Halen's self-titled album, where you're making something that's really hard to top. And the rest of their albums are really good as well, which is kind of crazy to be able to keep up that level of success.
No kidding. That creative output, which is always the key. How long does the wellspring of ideas keep churning? Because it's got to keep flowing. If it quits flowing, it's over. You know what I mean? So like, yeah, good call.
Did those albums come out the same year? That's funny if they did, just because we're talking about influence and freshman albums. Let's see, Van Halen.
You might be right.
I'm looking. 1978, February 10th. So yeah, wow.
We did the thing. You'd think we'd remember that. Well, I mean, you remembered it.
Yeah. So like, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Yeah, dude.
That's kind of just a coincidence, but that's crazy because you get two bands that are very influential to very different types of music, but definitely, I would say, specifically the 80s, everyone was trying to do what those two bands were doing or did on their first album. So that's insane to think about in itself.
I mean, dude, just imagine being a teenager in 78 and driving around and brand new in your ears is some band called Van Halen and some band called The Cars.
Would have been a great time to be alive. I wouldn't know, Tom. You can tell me all about it.
I wasn't a teenager in the 70s, man. Bite your tongue. See what you did there? I was trying to be nostalgic, and you had to do that.
You were a kid in the 70s. You probably heard some of this.
I was a baby in the 70s. For 7 years I was in the 70s. That was it. So I guess that counts. Maybe.
I'm giving you a hard time because you started out this all Steely Dan, reeling in the years.
Oh my! There's a band that once they get in your head, you can't get them out of, for better or worse. Yeah, don't know if we'll be doing any Steely Dan here, kids, but you never can tell. So, well, Chris, before we get out of here, if you got anything left, give me your last word on the Cars debut album.
I think it's a very influential album. I love this album. It's much like Van Halen. You get a short track list, 30 minutes.
35
minutes, perfect runtime for me. It's good. You could put it on for a good car trip. It's just a great album. And one that listening back to it the past 2 days, I hadn't listened to it in a while. Had good feelings and nostalgia, specific moments I could think of in my head, riding around in my Jeep Grand Cherokee in high school, for instance, but playing with my first band. Just one of those albums, man. I really love it. I really enjoyed giving it a deep dive, actually taking notes on things and listening to it. So I hope the people listening out there enjoyed some of my takes on the tracks. Hopefully they did.
Yeah, for sure. And, the cool thing about both those bands, they had other good albums. Like,
that's true.
We could always circle back, and there's plenty of bands we've not talked about yet. So that's, again, when and I have other podcasts that are specific to a specific topic, but when you're wide open with your range of subject matter, then you can tackle anything, which is why I love doing the 6M, because we can tackle anything here. So, pretty much nothing off the table. But kids, stay tuned for more stuff about the Cars and Van Halen and some other bands. We'll continue to review albums and do our due diligence when it comes to the greatest music of all time. And it's what I love doing. So stay tuned for that, and we will tackle it in short order. But for now, that is the Cars debut album. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.